for great wealth, great power. He was world famous for his wisdom. Verse 34 of 1 Kings 4 says, all the people of the nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. We read over the next few chapters Solomon's life. We get to the end of his life, and he turns from the Lord. And we find in 1 Kings 11, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. 1,000 wives, basically, is what he has. He has gone down that path. He's gone down all the paths that he can, and we see hints of this all through the book, even in this morning's passage. But the scripture doesn't tell us explicitly that it's Solomon. What's important to know is the association we're to take away is these are the words of a preacher who's sharing his wisdom because he has it, and he has the means and the capacity to use that wisdom to explore every possible road, and he's found that every road leads in a dead end. Every path that he can take leads in a dead end. One who has this wisdom and sharing his wisdom with, what is his conclusion? Point number one, everything is meaningless. Everything is meaningless. He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Or in the NIV translates it, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And Kohelet leads with his conclusion. And he spends the rest of the book in circular fashion kind of fleshing that out and showing what he means and proving to us that his observations are true. Life has no meaning in itself. Everything about our life is vanity. It's meaningless on its own. Now, there's a couple of phrases that if we're going to go through the book of Ecclesiastes, it'll be important that we understand them. One we just heard, and that's the word vanity or meaningless. It's the Hebrew word habel, and it's found in the book of Ecclesiastes 34 times. So over and over and over, the writer will tell us that life and all of these aspects of life and all of these different pursuits are meaningless. That word is translated sometimes as breath or vapor, and the picture is on a cold day when you breathe out and you see the vapor coming out, but it's gone as soon as it's there. It's something that's meaningless. You kind of get the sense from, say, Psalm 144, verse 4, where it says, using the same word, man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow. And what you see in the first 11 chapters of this book is that every road that he takes is a dead end. Every path that he pursues leads to nowhere. It's not just the bridge to nowhere, it's everything leads to nowhere. Everything leads to nothing. Life is short. All of us die in our life and every aspect of living, no matter the path that we choose. No matter the path that we choose. That's what he says. It doesn't matter which direction we go. Ultimately, it's meaningless. Are you significantly depressed yet? All right? If not, the writer will make sure that you will be. And what that does, it makes this book difficult to read, not only because it's discouraging, but also because it seems to go contrary to everything else that we read in the Scripture. It's kind of saying the opposite. Instead of life has hope, there is no hope. Instead of life has purpose, there is no purpose. Instead of life has meaning, there is no meaning. And so how do we interpret that? How do we understand that? And so the second phrase that's repeated in Ecclesiastes is helpful here, and we find that in verse 3, and that phrase is under the sun. 29 times in Ecclesiastes we see the phrase under the sun. It's unique to the book of Ecclesiastes, so you don't see it anywhere else in Scripture, only in this book. But what it refers to is the life here on this earth, the life under the sun, the life that's contained in this world that we live in. And so the writer is really writing from a secular perspective, a life apart from the knowledge of God, a perspective of the world without God, or rather a world in which God doesn't matter. And I think that makes it increasingly relevant for today, especially as we're talking to some of our unbelieving friends or just trying to discern all these different paths that people are on, is that it speaks to our culture in a profound way, because many people don't believe there is a God, or if they do believe there's a God, he doesn't matter. He's irrelevant. It's interesting to see how much this is increasing. Some of you read occasionally in the news the Pew research polls. They've been researching this for years and years and years. In 2007, about 15%, they'd ask people, what's your religious affiliation? And 15% of the people would say, none. I don't have any religious affiliation at all. And then by 2018 or 2011, doesn't matter the dates, we'll just say, I think it's 2011 now, it's 20%. Now here in 2021, it's 30%. So 3 out of every 10 people, when you ask them, what is your religious affiliation, they'll say, I don't have one. I'm a none. Interestingly, 85% of people will say, I believe in a God. I believe there's a God. You know, there's some kind of spiritual force, some kind of God out there. And yet, for many people, that's just kind of a fact that's out there. It doesn't make any relevance to their life. We see that even in the church, those who believe in the God of the Bible, we're at the lowest level of church participation, even for those who believe in the God of the Bible. Because people are living, even with a knowledge of God, as if God doesn't matter. And this is where the writer of Ecclesiastes is coming from. He's writing about the world under the sun, the world in this world, as if there either is no God or God is irrelevant. And if that's the case, here's what I've observed. And so he wants to save us some trouble by showing us that every pursuit, every possible pursuit in life is a dead end. It does not bring satisfaction, and it ultimately has no meaning. Basically, he's saying, I've been there, I've done that. Now, why don't you just learn from my mistakes? Because I'm going to tell you how it is. And as I read it, from the time I was a teenager reading through the Bible for the first time, and now even as I'm preparing for the service, this series of sermons, it rings true. It rings true. And so our everything is meaningless. Our pursuits are meaningless. Our effort is meaningless. And just want to, got a lot of notes here, but I just want to take us through the thoughts as he progresses here. He asks in verse 3, he says, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. He's saying, what good is it to pursue anything at all? All of this toil that we do, every single day, people are born. Every single day, people die. People are born, people die. Every person that's born eventually will die. And the earth just keeps going and going and going. And it's just constant. I remember some of you that are alive in the 80s, I remember in the 80s, you remember the bumper sticker that says, he who dies with the most toys wins. You know, because that was a pursuit. We were following the American dream. And then, of course, the Christians had to have the counter bumper sticker that says, he who dies with the most toys still dies. And the reality is that everything keeps on going even though we do not. Observing the natural world. What is it? Jesus even said in Mark 8:36, he says, what does it profit if you gain the entire world but you lose your soul? There is nothing gained from our pursuits. It's just meaningless. And he goes on. Verses 5 through 7, he kind of uses the nature as kind of a metaphor and as proof that nothing is accomplished. Not only is nothing gained, nothing's ever finished. He says the sun rises and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. So, did you miss last night's sunset? There's going to be another one tonight, and the next night, and the next night. And you think this day is over, there's another day tomorrow. It just keeps going and going and going. He says, the wind blows to the south, it goes around to the north, around and round it goes, the wind on its circuits, the wind returns. So it doesn't matter that the wind passed you by, because it's going to come loop around and hit you again. Later on, one of the phrases he uses is like grasping after the wind. It's like the wind's going by, let's see if I can catch it. You can't. It's just constant. He says all the streams run to the sea, but the sea's not full. Do you ever think about that? You know, St. Joe River, right over, like a quarter mile over here, it's constantly flowing.